call to order the meeting for the Colerain Township Board of Zoning Appeals for May 23rd, 2018. We will begin with a Pledge of Allegiance. So if you would stand, we'll do that. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In the event that you have not had an opportunity to bring an appeal before the Board of Zoning Appeals, I'll give a brief overview of what's going to happen or the sequence of events. There'll be two components to these comments. First, a listing of the primary functions of the board, and second, the sequence of activities for the meeting. The primary functions of the Board of Zoning Appeals are to hear appeals from the administrative interpretation of the zoning code, such as the administrative denial of a zoning permit, to hear requests for variances, to hear requests for conditional uses, and finally, hearing requests for expansion or change to a non-conforming use or building. The sequence of events. The staff will present an overview of each case. That presentation will include photos, diagrams, and other materials pertinent to the case. They will also make a recommendation to the board as to the disposition of the case. The chairman will next open the hearing to the appellant to present his or her case. Following this, anyone who is opposed to the appeal will be allowed to speak. After comments for and against the appeal have been made, the chairman will close the public comment component. Each board member will then address questions to the appellant, the staff, and as appropriate, those opposed. After questions have been answered to the satisfaction of the board, the chairman will ask for a motion to approve or deny the request. The vote is the final action of the board. For housekeeping, please make all comments from the podium. All testimony is transcribed, and it's important that the transcriber hear your comments correctly. The nature of the BZA as a quasi-judicial, respect by and for every participant is paramount, and the chairman reserves the right to excuse anyone that is displaying disruptive behavior. We will do a roll call next, please.
Ms. Wilson? Mr. Bartolt?
Here.
Mr. Price?
Here.
Mr. Roberto?
Present.
Mr. Reiniger?
Here. Thank you. We do not have an alternate to seat, so the board will function tonight short one member. I'm going to ask all those who testify or wish to speak tonight to stand and raise your right hand, please. Very good. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before the Board of Zoning Appeals? Say, I do. Thank you. We will begin with our case presentations. The first case tonight is BZA 2017-19. It is a request for off-site signage variance from section 15.5.4, section 15.8.3, bracket D, section 15.8.3, bracket H, bracket 8, section 19.9.1, bracket B, section 15.9, bracket point 1, bracket C, 15.9, bracket D, and 15.9.2, bracket B. Location is 8195 Colerain Avenue. The applicant owner is Bob Carpenter, Carpenter Sign Service, and Thornton's Incorporated. The case presentation, please.
Yes, this is a continuation of a case that you heard back in March. Actually, the original application came in 2017. It's been tabled at the request of the applicant a few times. Last time that you had the hearing, you saw that the proposal was for a new sign for Roller Fun, Inc., but it would be off-site on the Thornton's property, which is adjacent to it. They have a shared driveway that serves both Thornton's and Roller Fun. Their desire was to have a new sign at that entry location. However, the zoning restrictions only allow for one freestanding business sign per property. This would be considered a billboard sign because it's off-site advertising. There was also consideration that they wanted to have an electronic reader board, and we have a required spacing of 1,000 feet on the same side of the street for electronic reader boards. And Thornton's has one, and Lebanon Citizens Bank, which is also adjacent, has one, so they don't meet the spacing requirements. So those were the issues. In the staff report for last month, we had a note in there that we do allow off-site signs in the form of what we call driveway entry signs that can say basically enter here and then have Roller Fun or whatever the name of the business is. And those are permissible. However, they're only allowed to be 4 square feet in size, 3 feet in height. So if they had one of those in the place where the electronic reader board is being proposed, that would have met zoning and no variance would be needed for that sign. We had also noted that the other driveway for Roller Fun off of Galbraith has a non-conforming pylon sign. It's non-conforming in that it's about 20 feet tall. The maximum height allowed is 15 feet, and it's also just behind the right-of-way, whereas 10 feet setback would be required by today's standards. So given that there was discussion and thought of what other options could be reached, the sign company has reissued a new proposal for a driveway sign at the same location that you looked at last month, and I'll kind of run through that. Yeah, this is the site. You can see where Thornton's, the place, which is behind it off of Lina Place, which is a very narrow township street, Lebanon Citizens, and then a driveway that's between Lebanon Citizens and the License Bureau, which is actually owned by Roller Fun. This is the street view from Galbraith Road. That's the shared driveway and the proposed location for the sign. And this is the Thorntons. There is also a non-conforming billboard on the Thorntons property. And this shows the billboard, the sign on the corner, which has the reader board, which is actually just the gas price. And there's a yellow arrow there showing the proposed location. And way in the background, you can see there's a Lebanon Citizens pylon sign as well. And here's the signs. The one in the center is actually on Roller Fun's driveway. They own that strip of land, and that's the non-conforming 20-foot tall sign. The new proposal is to actually remove that 20-foot tall sign and replace it with a driveway type sign. The request, though, is if they do the driveway sign, they would like to have it bigger. Instead of 4 square feet, they would like 8 square feet. Instead of 3 feet in height, they'd like 4 feet in height. And that's basically just to get it more noticed, I guess. And this is the previous proposed sign and the new proposed freestanding sign. This is, the new proposal is to go 1 foot 8 inches shorter at 10 foot 5 inches for, yeah, 10 foot 5 inches is, I believe, the height. Yeah, and 2 square feet smaller. If this were on their property as a freestanding sign, they would be allowed up to 15 feet in height. So this is considerably about a third shorter. And it's also, they would be allowed up to 150 square feet. So at 31.65 square feet, they're much smaller than what they would normally be able to have if it was on their property. So that's the revised proposal. This shows the current sign that's on Galbraith and a representation of what it would look like to eliminate that sign and replace it with another. This would also require a setback variance, and I don't know if you call it require, but there's a utility pole that is right about at the 10-foot setback. And so they have to avoid that. They'd either have to be behind it or in front of it. There's no room in that 20-foot wide strip to move it either east or west out of way of that utility pole. Also, what they would like to do, since the base of the sign is already there, is basically cut off the pole and reuse that pole, the stub of the pole, as the support for the new sign. So that's the justification for the setback variance. And this is kind of the overall scheme of locations of the signs. And the Thornton's site. We reviewed this last time, so I'm not going to go over all the definitions. Just to note, though, that this new proposal, there was a proposal before to not do the landscaping for that new electronic reader board sign. They have agreed that they would comply with the standards. It's basically 31 square feet of landscaping would be required at the base of the sign with shrubs or flowers or something like that. And then the new thing is that the driveway sign that's being proposed, since they're taking down a non-conforming sign and putting a new sign up, that carries with it another set of variance requests. And that's a waiver from the 10-foot setback requirement. 4 foot is proposed, so that's a 6-foot setback variance. 3 foot is the maximum height. 4 foot is proposed, so that's a 1 foot height variance. And then the maximum size is 8 square feet. The proposed is 4 square feet, so that's a got that backwards. 8 square feet is proposed, 4 is allowed, so it's a 4 square foot variance. So that's how the new part plays out. We're still looking at the stipulations for being a billboard and off-site advertising sign. That billboards are required to be its own use on a piece of property, whereas this also has a gas station on the property. Spacing of billboards and setbacks for billboards, if we consider this to be a billboard sign, which it does meet that definition. Staff findings on this. The sign variances requested are substantial, since the zoning resolution encourages the elimination of non-conforming signs and encourages restrictions of the number of signs, electronically activated signs, and billboards. The granting of variances would result in an increase in overall sign area allowed for the property. The property in question would likely yield a reasonable return without the variance. The granting of the variance would probably not have a negative impact on the neighboring properties, but could create a precedent to allow for the replacement of other non-conforming signs in non-conforming manner if requested by similar properties. The granting of the variance request would result in a larger amount of signage on the subject property than other surrounding properties. Approval of the sign variances would not affect the delivery of government services. And there are no unusual topographic site configuration issues with this property that would prevent the reasonable application of the sign regulations. However, the property is somewhat at a disadvantage in that it does not have substantial street frontage on a major street, which would enhance the visibility of the business. Lastly, by taking into consideration the overall benefit to the applicant, if the variance is granted, is weighed against the potential detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood and broader community, staff finds that substantial justice would be done by granting the variance for the proposed off-premise signs. And I'll kind of explain that. Well, I'll read, our recommendation is for approval, subject to the following conditions. Number one, that the size of the proposed off-site sign be restricted to the proposed, which is 10 foot 5 inches in height, 31.6 square feet in size. and the proposed off-site sign and proposed driveway sign be allowed in substitution for a freestanding sign on the driveway owned by the place on West Galbraith Road. Only a driveway sign with variances per the revised proposal would be allowed at this location. In reviewing this, the place is allowed to have a freestanding sign on that strip of land between LCMB and the License Bureau. And they could have a pylon sign up to 150 square feet, 15 feet in height, etc. My thinking from staff standpoint is having shared driveways, shared entries, signage, etc., almost starts acting like a planned development. And in planned developments, you do have flexibility in terms of how you advertise for businesses that are sort of part of a complex. The place is in an awkward location. I don't think that's going to change necessarily. Lina Place will not be a major street or thoroughfare for access. And in the Groesbeck neighborhood, this is kind of a vibrant business that provides a service to the area and an amenity. So from staff standpoint, we would like to encourage the success of the place. And if the variance is approved as a substitution of signs, we're not gaining additional signage. We're just giving flexibility on the location for the sign that's eligible. As a matter of fact, we're giving that flexibility in exchange for a smaller, shorter sign. The other issue on the electronic reader boards we kind of struggle with, and I agree with the principle that too many electronic reader boards do become very distractive. Keep in mind, though, our regulations for electronic reader boards require that they have a fixed message, and that message is only allowed to change a couple times per minute. So we don't have like video screens with active moving messages. They can't scroll the message. It has to be a fixed message. So that's a little less distracting. It's basically going to serve as a internally illuminated sign that just will change its message periodically. So that's where staff is. We generally like to be restrictive with signs, but in this particular case, having a business with no legitimate street frontage, we think it's necessary.
Okay, thank you. Is the applicant here present for?
Can I ask a question first to the staff? Just a
Okay, go ahead.
procedural thing. Neither in the agenda or the staff findings did you mention 15.8.3E, which is the driveway sign. They do need, so they do want it. When we vote and come up with a formulation, we have to include that too, correct?
Yes.
Directional sign.
That's for the driveway sign?
Yeah, they're calling it a directional sign now, right?
Well, in his paragraph, he called it a driveway sign, but
Yeah,
it just wasn't listed in your first paragraph, but we do
Okay.
need to
Yes.
include
you would,
15.8.3E.
right.
Okay,
And there would be a variance on
right.
height,
Location.
size, and setback for that particular sign.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Is the applicant here? Please state your name and address.
Brian Liette, 3211 Lina Place.
Let me check them off.
Let's see. Did you sign in?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Okay. Just, please, your comments?
I didn't know if you had questions for me. I didn't really have any comments. What we proposed, it seems like Colerain agrees with it, feels it's a good idea. We want to work with the township, but we also would like as much signage on Galbraith close to Colerain as possible. but what is proposed would cover all of that. The first time we were here, I talked about the land that we owned. We owned that land that Thornton's built on, and we sold that with Colerain, talking to Colerain Township and talking to Thornton's to have permission for a sign at a later date, because we knew we were doing the expansion. But to help clean up that corner, get rid of the existing business that was a rough situation, and put in a nice new business, we sold that land. But we originally bought that land so that we could have a sign on Galbraith Road, on Galbraith, closer to Colerain Avenue. So, but that was really it. Everything else sounds like Colerain Township is okay with what we had proposed.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else speak in favor of this? Anyone speak in opposition?
We'll call you back up.
Okay.
Okay. If there are no other public comments, I'll ask for a motion to close the public part of this presentation.
Motion to close?
Second?
I'll second. Oh, which one?
All right, second by Mr. Roberto. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Roll call. Do you need a roll call?
do we need a roll call for just a
To close the public hearing, you do.
close? All right, let's do a roll call vote to close public hearing.
Mr. Bartolt,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mr. Roberto,
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger.
Aye. Thank you. All right, now let's proceed with our questions. Mr. Bartolt?
Probably no questions, other than just, thanks for rethinking the whole kind of problem. We do realize you're landlocked, and that's why we do have variances, because of a unique situation. But I don't really have any questions.
Okay.
I have no questions either.
Mr. Roberto?
Will you come up? So the sign that's going to be your driveway marker, have you guys gone out and visually looked to see if that's going to be an impairment for cars coming in and out of that driveway?
We looked at it. One of the things I was thinking while Marty was speaking is, I think we need to go out there with
I'd mock
actual-
something up, because I'm really concerned that that's going to be a cause of a blind spot for people trying to get out on the
And I was thinking the exact same thing. I use the same driveway myself day after day, so, but definitely I would want to go out there, lay it out, maybe put up a piece of wood, drive in and out of there several times and see how it works. So we obviously don't want to cause a problem on that piece. There's a lot of traffic in and out next to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and it's already a difficult situation getting in and out of that spot.
Okay. And then talking about the staticness of the electronic sign, what is your plans on having, what's going to be on that LED sign? And
Well, our logo to start with, and then I know they were talking about the message has to be, what is it, only a couple per minute, is that correct? Like one every 30 seconds?
so you don't plan on having a video or anything
No.
like that on there? Okay. And the landscaping area, then, does that mean you're going to take care of the landscaping area as far as making sure it's?
We would have to. I would talk with Thornton's. We work with Thornton's all the time as it is. There's a gentleman that helps Thornton's clean their property. We go around and we help also, and also we help clean the bank parking lot too, because we know a lot of the debris we're sharing all that debris. Some of it's my customers, some of it's Thornton's. So I'm sure it's going to work the same way with the landscaping. It's going to be our job to put it in there and make sure it's right, but keeping it up, we'll work together and make sure that everything looks good.
I appreciate that. I know that you've been great for the community, and you've honored what you said you were going to do. So I mean that means a lot to the board. Let's see. I think I visited everything I wanted to address. Pass to you.
My comments reflect Mr. Roberto's concerns. Line of sight coming out of the driveway is important, and I appreciate the fact that you're willing to take a look at that. If you work with Mr. Kohler, that may wind up reducing the size of that down to the regulations, but
Obviously, safety is more important than,
it won't be any bigger, but it might be smaller.
yeah.
Are there any other comments from the board? Thank you. Okay. I'll ask for a motion to approve.
I will make a motion to approve the variance based upon the staff's recommendations.
Second,
I'll second that.
discussion? Okay, roll call vote, please. And let me make sure I can clarify that this will be a motion to approve, and with the caveat that we'll look at that line of sight for the driveway entrance to make sure that sign is not impeding visibility. Okay. Any other discussion? Roll call vote, Jesse?
Mr. Bartolt,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mr. Roberto,
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger.
Aye. All right, it has been approved. Thank you. The next case is BZA 2018-03. It's a request for a variance from section 7.3.1. The location is 8438 Weiss Road. The applicant owner is Mark Venerman, I think. And staff presentation, please.
Yes, this is a request for a reduction from the required minimum side yard setback for a property on Weiss Road. This is south of Reagan Highway, north of Blue Rock, or north of Galbraith. The property, the house currently has no garage. Their intent is to try to add a single-car garage to the south side of the house. This particular property was built, or the house was built in the 1950s before we had zoning. The lot is pretty narrow. It's only 58 feet wide. And currently, the house does meet the side yard setback requirements. The way it is framed, that you have to have a minimum of 18 feet on both sides, house total, with one side being a minimum of 10 feet. I've had a little perplexion over the way we do these. Like some zones will say total of 15 feet with 10 feet on one side. It's always 10 feet on one side. And I believe the intent is that if you ever need to do service in the backyard, you've got at least room that you could get a vehicle around the house. I believe that's what the intent is. The odd thing is there's no absolute minimum, that theoretically you could build a house right on one side and leave 18 feet on the other. Nobody's done that in the time I've come here, but I've always kind of wondered how that might play out. But in any event, in this particular case, the addition of the garage would encroach into the side yard and reduce both that total to under 18 feet and one side to less than 10 feet. This is a floor plan of the proposed garage. It's single car wide. And this is a side view of the proposed garage. The unusual circumstance in this is when the house was built, there was a cistern built. And I'm guessing that back in the 50s, they probably didn't have public water out here, so there was a cistern that would catch the rainwater off the roof. And it has full foundations. It goes below the frost line. And it has a slab on top of it that they currently park cars on. It's a fairly substantial piece of slab. And then also you can see off the back of the house, there's a wood deck that's raised off the ground. This lot slopes to the rear a fair amount. There is a septic system in the rear yard of this house. The yard is very narrow, but it is also very deep. The house meets the front yard setback. It is right on the front yard setback, which is 35 feet. This is a street view. You can see that slab on the right side of the house. This is another view. You can kind of see that wedge shape on the side of it as the ground drops off alongside of that. I didn't get a very good photograph. This would be sort of a representation of where the garage would go. This is an aerial side view from Google. Again, you can kind of see the ground dropping off with that slab. And that would be about the footprint of where the garage would go. Section 7.3.1 requires minimum side yard of 10 feet on one side, total of 18. Construction of the garage as proposed would have a total side yard setback would be 10 feet 9 inches on both sides. That's 7 feet 3 inches short of the minimum. And larger side yard would be 6 feet 8 inches or 3 foot 4 inches shorter than minimum. Staff findings. If I can read this on my screen. The property in question would likely yield a reasonable return without a variance. The property can reasonably be used as a single-family dwelling within the limits of the zoning regulations. The setback variances requested are substantial since the proposed building extends into the minimum side yard setback by 33%. The granting of the variance would grant a consideration not available to other property owners in the neighborhood. The granting of the variance would probably not have a negative impact on neighboring property, but would create a precedent to allow for side additions if requested by neighboring properties or on site conditions. Approval of the setback variances would not affect the delivery of government services. There are some topographic issues related to the property which would constrain the reasonable application of the setback regulations without additional expenses. By taking into consideration the benefits to the applicant if the variance is granted, as weighed against the potential detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighboring neighborhood and broader community, staff finds that substantial justice would be done by granting the variance for the setback for the proposed garage. Staff's recommendation is for approval of this variance request. The mitigating situation in our mind in making this recommendation is that while garages are not necessarily required for a residential structure, it is a very nice amenity in this day and age to have some garage for a house. They would be allowed to have a detached garage in the rear yard. However, to get to the rear yard, the only way they could do that would be to completely demolish that side slab and deck and continue the driveway down into the backyard. That's a fairly substantial structure in that cistern. It does provide support for a garage. They've had a designer look at this. And my thought is that is a pretty extreme thing to have to do to get a garage on this particular piece of property. We would like to think that they would have an ability to, say, service the septic system if they needed to, getting vehicles around the side of the house. However, that particular structure is already providing the obstruction. The addition of the garage would not increase the obstruction. They're basically just building vertically on it. Most of the lots in this neighborhood are much wider. This is the narrowest lot on this stretch of road, giving them the smallest side yard setbacks. So it is a little bit unusual circumstance. Generally, we like to see people comply with the setback requirements where possible, but I think this particular case warrants some special consideration.
Any questions for staff before we go to the public? Is the applicant here to come on up? Give us your name and address, please.
Mark Veneman, 8438 West Road. As was stated, I'm only looking to go vertical. I'm not approaching the neighbor's yard. I have 4 neighbors with me tonight, including the neighbor that the garage will be on his side, and they're all for it to be done. The house doesn't have a garage, and I like to put one there. Foundation's there, footer's there, everything else is, everything's there. I'm not approaching, just wanting to go up.
Okay. Very good. You're certainly welcome. Is there anyone else here to speak in favor of this? If you'd please have a seat, come on up, give us your name and address, please.
Hi, I'm Dale Cavis, 8430 West.
Dale, did you sign in?
No, I didn't. I didn't realize that we would have to.
Were you sworn in?
No, but I can.
All right. In order to do a presentation, I have to ask you to raise your right hand. And do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before the Board of Zoning Appeals? Say, I do.
I do.
Thank you. All right, proceed.
Okay, so I have the house directly south of Mark's house. I actually was born and raised in that house that I live in. And as a child, there was a carport on that property. And unfortunately, one family did not take very good care of the house, and the carport rotted and fell in. So it was roofed. It was basically a garage that was just kind of open air, for lack of a better way. I think it would really greatly improve the look of the house, and make the neighborhood just a little bit more put together looking. So I know it would be very helpful for Mark, and it would not bother me in the least. And I'm the person that would affect the most as far as visually. So
Okay.
anyhow,
What is our address again?
8430. It's the
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
one right there.
Thank you.
All right.
Anyone else speak in favor? Anyone to speak in opposition? I'll call for a motion to close the public portion of this case.
So moved.
Go ahead.
Motion's made, second.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and second. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Bartolt,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mr. Roberto,
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger.
Aye. Okay, questions from the board. Mr. Roberto.
I didn't see a blueprints. Marty, you had something up on the screen as far as something that they had provided, I guess? So this is the rendering they provided?
Yes, I do.
So the house is just going to continue on as a ranch style?
Yes, I added the 2 windows to the south side to make it more pleasing when you come over to the hill. You can see my house sticks out. So I figured the 2 windows will add to the beauty of it, I guess you could say, to make it more look like a house than anything else, and just slapping siding on the side of it.
And then the roof and everything is going to look continuous?
Everything will match, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, I have no other questions.
Okay, Mr. Price.
I was just curious, sir,
Yeah, you might just stay up there.
Mark.
that concrete slab that's there, how long has that been there? Since construction of the house, pretty much?
No. Somebody had it replaced. It's been replaced. The slab's been replaced. The driveway's been replaced, all but the same time. I got a Z71, and I park on it all the time. So, I mean, I'm comfortable with it. I mean, it's not going anywhere.
Okay, and you, in your remarks, you had mentioned that there was an incident with a vehicle there? That was one of the reasons that you wanted to get a garage?
Correct. My fiance, she's a subcontractor for the federal government. She works for KLD, and she has a company vehicle, and it's labeled. And about a year ago, it was egged. It was the only vehicle that was egged. So somebody knew something about KLD and just hit that vehicle.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Bartol? Might as well stay there.
Well, I guess piggybacking on that, I guess if we grant the variance, that in no way is making the board, I'll say, responsible for the slab thickness. I mean, we don't know the slab thickness. We don't know if it can hold vehicles. That's your risk. I don't know if you've had it core drilled or if you know how thick it is. Is the whole thing underneath hollow as a
Yes.
cistern?
I lived there for 8 years and been parking on it for 8 years.
Well, I know, but tomorrow
So-
it could cave in, you know what I'm saying?
There's no cracks,
Right.
signs of that happening.
All right, I just wanted to be clear that we're not advocating parking on it. That's totally your call. Okay.
As a comment, he will need to get a building permit through the Hamilton County Building Department, and they'll conduct inspections and plan reviews.
Right.
Two quick questions, sir. How do is your septic tank still active, or do you have sewers on the street?
Septic tanks.
How do they pump it at this point? Do they run a hose from your driveway all the way
The
back?
driveway back. Yes.
Very good. I've got no other questions. I'll ask for a motion for approval of the variance.
I'll make a motion to approve the variance as noted.
I'll second it.
The motion's been made and seconded. Discussion? Hearing none. Do a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Bartoltz?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mr. Roberto?
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger?
Aye. Okay, the variance has been approved. Thank you very much. The next case is the BZA 2018-04, request for a conditional use addition located in an R6 zoning district at locations 10036 Menominee Drive. Applicant owner is Bear Becker, Cambodian Buddhist Temple. Is there a presentation by the staff, please?
Yes, there is. This is a conditional use for a religious place of worship. Those are recognized by our zoning code as allowed uses within residential districts, subject to the approval of the Board of Zoning Appeals. The reason for conditional uses are generally that, if not properly planned, they could cause a disturbance within a residential neighborhood. So that's why there's extra requirements plus an extra level of review. At the time that this building was initially constructed was prior to our current code, at which time religious places of worship were allowed in residential districts as an outright permitted use. There was a time when it did not require BZA approval. Furthermore, the building setback standards and designs were the same as if it were a single-family house. So this building was built to basically residential setback standards and would be considered non-conforming by today's standards. The parking is the same thing. In the current regulations, there's a 50-foot setback variance for all buildings and parking areas. Now, with that said, they are not proposing to make any changes to the current building. This is a proposal for a separate new building on the site with the other buildings to remain as well. The proposed building does meet all the site setback, height, et cetera, requirements. They are planning on continuing the use of the non-conforming paved areas as well. This is looking south across the site. It's a little hard to tell from this photograph, but the grade drops sharply from where the paved area is in the foreground to the paved area in the background. The proposed building, as you're looking at it from this side, would be 1 story high. Looking at it from that parking lot below back, it would be a 2-story building. It's basically built into the hillside. This is the current parking area. This site is completely surrounded by single-family houses. It's actually in the backyards of single-family houses. This looks out from the site into those areas. We took these photographs just before the vegetation was coming out in bud. Everything around there is deciduous, so in the wintertime, there's a very clear view from the site into the neighboring backyards. There is a proposal we'll see on the plan in a little bit. I'll probably end up jumping back and forth. The proposal called for a slight expansion of parking lot in this location. Again, it's required to be, excuse me, a 50-foot setback. This is substantially less. I'll come up with that dimension for you in a bit. But the proposal was to add more paving, about 6 more feet in this location, going closer to the backyards of those adjacent houses. Our recommendation is that they not be allowed to expand it in a non-conforming way at this location. Some other views looking from the parking. One of our other recommendations is going to be, when we get down to that, is that they are providing substantial amount of landscaping, but I'm a little uncertain as to whether it's really going to shield these backyards from headlights at night. Our recommendation is that they actually put up a privacy fence along that property boundary, just in the places where you have vehicular traffic and headlights. This is the site plan. Kind of a close-up of that. This has some of the landscape included on it. There would be kind of a balcony arrangement on the second floor on the bottom side of this, with a large outdoor staircase going down towards the parking. That area that's shown, a sort of wedge-shaped area that's shaded in gray next to the parking, that's the area proposed for expansion. It's our thought that if they are going to expand it, they should expand on the east side of the parking lot rather than the west, going towards their detention basin, and that would be in compliance with setback. Another view, there's, again, a lot of landscaping. However, there's supposed to be that 50-foot separation. In some places, it's only about 5 to 10 feet of separation, so that they physically cannot fit in enough landscape to really effectively deal with traffic shielding at night. They are proposing additional lighting in the parking lot, which they currently do not have. The photometrics show that the light levels would be at a 0 level at the property boundaries, which complies with code. Another view of the site. Another close-up of the building with the landscaping. We actually do not require elevation drawings or floor plans for these buildings as part of the conditional use, and they're not provided. However, we do not have architectural standards to evaluate the buildings, so it's somewhat irrelevant, although sometimes we do get those with applications. Staff findings are that the use is a conditional use permitted by the Board of Zoning Appeals in the district where the subject property is located. The use is in accordance with the objectives of the Northbrook Groesbeck area of the township, the comprehensive plan and zoning regulations. The conditional use will not substantially or permanently injure the appropriate use of the neighboring properties if approved with reasonable restrictions to mitigate the more intensive use of the property, including noise, outdoor lighting, parking, otherwise will serve the public convenience and welfare. The use will not create excessive requirements at public cost for public facilities and services, and will not be detrimental to the economic welfare of the community. Staff's recommendation is for approval of the following approval, subject to the following conditions and variances. The conditions are that the existing dense vegetation along the property lines bordering adjacent residential development be maintained in its dense condition and be used as partial substitution for buffering, the required buffering. Number two, that the 6-foot tall privacy fence be installed on the west and south property lines in addition to the proposed landscaping adjacent to lots 180 through 188 and 190 to further buffer these lots from traffic circulation from the Cambodian Buddhist property. And third, that any future expansion of the building or parking areas shall require a conditional use application to the Board of Zoning Appeals. The variance would be from section 14.5.2 lot buffers to forego the buffer landscape requirement on the south and east property lines so long as the proposed parking lot screening landscaping is constructed and maintained. And then secondly, from the variance from section 7.4.10C to allow for the expansion of the pavement on the southwest corner of the building. Our recommendation is that be denied and the parking be expanded on the east side of the parking lot to accommodate additional width. This is a somewhat complicated case in that we have some nonconformities with the site. Some nonconformities would be extremely difficult to correct. For instance, the building setback of the existing building. To require that they conform to the 50-foot setback is probably not practical. Some of the other site features like particularly the east property boundary, they're not necessarily building towards that boundary. It's non-conforming with respect to they don't have the required buffering along the eastern property boundary, but they're not increasing the impact to that boundary, and there's natural vegetation there. So the question is, how much of the nonconformity do we want to resolve or make better? And in staff's mind, going with the landscape plan as proposed with the addition of a privacy fence and not allowing the parking lot to be expanded further into the setback, we think are reasonable conditions towards bringing the site into conformity. Does that make sense, I guess?
Questions for the staff?
So, Marty, the new building does meet all the requirements, though, correct?
For setbacks, height, all of that. The building itself does.
Okay.
And for the, you mentioned the denial of the parking in that southwest corner. You didn't give how many parking spaces that would affect, but it would be just enough to that they meet the 50-foot setback.
They will not meet the 50-foot setback. None of the pavement on the west side of that lot meets the 50-foot setback. But our recommendation is to not allow additional pavement to encroach into that. If they add an equal amount of pavement to the opposite side of the parking lot, they shouldn't lose any parking spaces. It's simply swapping out one side to the other.
But are you saying the existing 7 stalls on the south are existing?
Yes.
And you're okay with leaving them there?
Yeah, it's an existing condition.
Yeah.
And the recommendation is for those first 2 lots in from the southwest corner that they extend the privacy fence, whereas there is no protection now.
Okay.
Is the applicant here, or someone to represent the applicant? Your name, sir?
My name is Ryan O'Malley. The address is 4232 Florida Avenue.
Did you sign in, sir?
Yes, I did.
There's another sheet up there. You can check.
I didn't put my address down, actually, when I signed in.
What is the address again?
It's 4232 Florida Avenue.
Florida?
Yes.
Okay, your comments, sir?
So the Cambodian Buddhist temple community is looking to expand a little bit. At this point, they're basically at capacity. So they're doing the best with what they've got. They've got a building that's, I think, 20 years old. They're looking to build a new building directly to the south of that building on their property with proper setbacks. And in order to provide the required parking for that building, they are proposing to upgrade the existing parking lot. Now, we've worked with the city to address their concerns and basically bring that existing parking into compliance. The only part of that parking that is an expansion, as already noted, is that little sliver in the southwest corner. It would be certainly more convenient if we could just, capture that 375 square feet. That would certainly be the most efficient way to do it, but certainly our client is open to the proposal that staff has made to basically expand to the opposite side and therefore be in conformance with the setback. So I think the bottom line here is that the community is not looking to bring a lot more, bodies into the site. At the moment, they are basically beyond capacity, and they're simply looking to provide a new, place of worship in order to accommodate that group. They, I think are primarily composed of people that come on the weekends. So there's maybe a concentration on the weekends. During the week, there's one resident on the property. So there's really not a lot of. We're not anticipating that this is going to result in a major expansion of persons and a major disturbance to the community.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else speak in favor? Sir.
My name is Mike Dooley with Bear Becker, 1404 Race Street. I want to first thank staff for working with us through this process. And as Ryan said, the major concern in working with them was bringing the existing parking lot up to standards with lighting and landscaping. And I think we've made an attempt to do that. I just wanted to address the wedge of parking again on the southwest corner. So the reason we went to the west side is if you look at the plan on the east side, there's a couple existing trees. I want to say there's maybe 5 or 6 trees that exist on the east side, and then the grade kind of falls off into the existing detention basin. So, I think we can shift to that side, but that's why we went to the east side, was so that we could keep those existing trees and keep that slope as it is. We'll continue to work with staff to come up with a solution that works with everyone, but if we were to go with maybe this configuration, maybe we can do increased landscaping in that corner or something like that. But I think we can come up with a solution, whether it's as the plan currently shows or with staff's recommendation on that. And then the comment on the, I just wanted to note that on the south property line, I believe that there already is a wood fence on that existing property owner on their property line. Again, I think it's something that we can look at, but just don't want to make a condition where there's that no man's land between 2 existing fences. So, in general, again, I want to thank staff for working with us, and we'll continue to work with them to get approval. So,
okay, thank you. Anyone else speak in favor? Okay. Did you sign in, sir?
I did not. I was a little late.
Okay. And were you sworn in? Okay. Please state your name.
My name is Daryl M. My address is 2046 Mouthwoods Drive. I'm part of the community, so I just want to say we've been great neighbors for our last 15, 20 years. And there's no, it's really a safe haven for the Cambodian community. So I hope that this will help us grow even more, and especially in education and other stuff as well. So that's really what I have to say.
If you would sign that sheet with your name and address, that'd be appreciated. that. Thank you.
I guess.
Okay. Is there anyone else to speak in favor? Anyone to speak in opposition? Does anyone to speak in opposition? We'll just one.
Opposition, I'm not one way or.
Okay, please come up and give us your name and address. And
My name is Michael Beckman. I live at 10,060 Menominee Drive. I butt right up to the back of this property on the west side. Don't really oppose the idea. I was just curious if they're going to address any of the drainage issues. The parking lot does not have any drains in it. The yards on the west side retain a lot of water. I moved there in I don't remember the year, 2007, 6-ish, somewhere around there. Not for sure when this driveway was put in, but ever since I've moved there, my yard stays wet. My neighbors, who we'll talk here in a second, they've had their bottom floor of their house flood. Never happened before the property existed, or before the driveway existed. I'm just curious if they're going to address any of the parking lot drainage issues during this process. I love Mr. Sock. They are great for the community. He's the monk that lives there, if anybody has a question about that. That's the only question I have.
Good.
Just the drainage.
thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else speak in opposition? Sir.
Tom Benderman, 10042 Menominee, next door neighbor with Mike. I do experience, since the building, quite a bit of water in the backyard. My lower level has been a couple inches deep with water. I've had to put in a sump pump to address the issue. There seems to be that the upper level parking lot leans in such a way that the water comes down the driveway and fills our backyards and my house. The neighbor on the other side of me is experiencing quite a bit of water problems himself. I'd like to address the privacy fence. My backyard is open straight to the concrete area right here that you see paved. I can look out my back door and I can see such a beautiful cultural exchange that I've never experienced before with these guys coming through with their wedding celebrations, their New Year's. My grandchildren are out there with me and they're exposed to a part of the world that they've never seen before. Put my backyard in a box is going to completely eliminate that. So I would prefer that instead of a privacy fence, put up some trees or something. We're not bothered by headlights. They're not busy during the week. They're populated on the weekends, and even at that, it's mostly during the day. That's about all I got.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak either for or against? Seeing no one else, I will ask for a motion to close the public portion of this hearing.
I'll make the motion to close it.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Roll call vote.
Mr. Bartolt.
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes.
Mr. Roberta.
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger.
Aye. Okay, now questions from the board. We'll start with Mr. Price.
That's a good question. I'm interested in the, I mean, I don't know that we can address the water issues because it's really not part of this process, right? But however, potentially we could, maybe forego the privacy fence like you were saying and have some type of plant that would perhaps absorb some of that groundwater installed instead of just a tree, perhaps, you know what I mean? A bush or a set of shrubs or something like that. We could approach it that way maybe, but I don't know that that would alleviate your water issue, but it may be something to think about. I don't know. Do you have any comments on that, sir?
Yeah, and I guess just as an overall standpoint, we'll meet the requirements of Hamilton County for stormwater as a part of this development for sure. But even above and beyond that, I think we'd be willing to work with the adjacent neighbors on the drainage. We haven't looked at that yet just because we're so early in the process, but I think what you're talking about is maybe like a rain garden or something like that. We can try to infiltrate some of that water into the existing ground, and there's some plants that can take that, like to sit wet like that can take that on. And so with the owner's approval, I think that we can work through those things.
That's really my biggest concern.
Mr. Bartle?
Well, I would second that. We can't really solve the drainage problems. We're not really adding any new asphalt, or the applicant's not in those areas. I'm just wondering about how we proceed with a vote. Now that we've heard that maybe this privacy fence is not opposed by certain neighbors, I'd hate to vote on this a certain way where we have to bundle all this together. And I don't know if we want to table this and they come back with new ideas based on everything we've heard tonight, but I'm not totally opposed to that little sliver of asphalt. And again, those 7 spots are existing, right, in the very south? Even the one where you're proposing the new asphalt?
So the whole lot's existing. It's just except for that sliver, and we're just kind of formalizing the lot. We'll restripe it.
Yeah.
Formalize it, the layout in a different way.
Okay.
And so we can make it work with shifting the strip on the other side. It'll just put a kink in the layout that we currently show, which isn't the end of the world. But I think our biggest concern was the existing trees, that we would try to keep those. And I worry that if we try to widen on that side, that we might lose those trees. So.
And if this gets approved and you go to the building department, will they force you to address any drainage issues with the existing asphalt paving? Or was it kind of grandfathered in?
I envision it to be more so with the proposed building, that we would address the proposed improvements as opposed to the existing. So, but obviously, if there's an issue, we would want to address that.
Would the new building have its roof water discharged underground or just onto the surface?
I want to say that MSD would make us take the downspouts underground somehow and pipe them from there.
Well, you do have the retention area.
So we've got an existing basin, yeah. So we would have to do a little investigation into what that all picks up. Obviously, it doesn't account for a new building, so we would have to work through the requirements to figure out what we need to do.
Okay, that's all I had.
Mr. Roberto?
I'm going to kind of reiterate, now's the time to fix a problem. If the problem is created because another resident is causing it, and in this particular case, I suspect that that's the case with the drive sloping the way it is towards the neighbor's property. It's just running all the surface water towards their property. So if anything we can do to correct that, I would recommend that be part of the proposal, is some sort of collection and run it to the extent you got a 12-inch high density storm drain that's going to the retention area. Figure out how to tie into it, go across, one trench across the parking lot and get it done. But let's make your neighbors happy, and that's why you're there in the community, and so you want to make your surrounding neighborhood people want to support you. That'd be the only thing and I don't have an issue with the corner parking lot if we, like they've mentioned, just increase your density there. It doesn't have to be a fence in my mind. It can be just more shrubbery or something along that line.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Thank you. The comments I would interject only reflect the ability to manage water runoff. It's not part of the variance, but it certainly is not ill-advised to have a rain garden or some way to keep the water on site. The issue with the fencing, I would ask or direct the staff to work with the neighbors, and if a fence is not entirely needed in one area, it may be waived, and if that's possible. But let's keep it as a community and not wall it off if we can avoid that. We have a request for a variance for this project, and I would like conditional use in addition. So I'd ask for a motion to approve the variance. Now, there's been discussion about the wedge in the parking lot. Do we want to drop that request and move it from the east to west or west to east?
Well, I'm still, it sounds like, I don't know, maybe you said the same thing, but are you okay with that triangular piece of,
It's so minimal.
yeah, I'm okay with it too,
Okay.
that we don't make it part of the condition.
I'm okay with it.
So we've got a change in the staff recommendations that the southwest corner of the parking lot be allowed to proceed as presented. Is that correct, gentlemen?
Contingent upon additional landscaping?
Depending
Yes.
upon additional landscaping and the screening from the privacy fence. Any other changes?
Again, I don't think I'd require them to put up a privacy fence. I think I would literally talk neighbor to neighbor and say, if you want it, they'll put it up. If you don't, they won't.
Okay.
We can do that.
And I know this isn't part of it, but I, again, revisit the water just to make sure that you're addressing it. Now's the time to do it before you go ahead and break ground.
All right. Okay. I will ask for approval for this use.
And that's, again, continuing with dense vegetation, et cetera, and again, trying to find something water retaining.
Okay. Is that a motion?
Well, it's part of this, so yeah, I just wanted to
Was
put it
yours a
in there.
motion, or were you just summarizing?
I think he was summarizing this.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to make a motion as well.
Okay, we just need a motion so we can move.
I will make a motion to approve the, let's see, get my terminology correct here. That we will approve the conditional use, and that the staff will review with the community the need for the fence. In addition, we will allow the expansion of the parking lot as part of that conditional use as drawn on the proposed drawings.
Okay. Is there a second?
Well, but what about also the variance 14.5.2, the lot buffers, to use existing dense vegetation? Do we have to mention that?
You gonna let that stand?
I mean, it's as it goes, the staff proposal, he already approved that and recommended it. I would approve that as well, include that as well, as the staff recommendation.
Okay. So the motion's been made.
I'll second that.
Motion's been made and seconded. Other discussion?
Sure.
I want to make sure staff's, is that good, the way we've recommended or made that motion? Is there
Yes,
everything
that's good.
clear? All right.
All right. So roll call vote, please.
Mr. Bartolt,
Yes?
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mr. Roberto,
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger.
Aye. Thank you.
Good luck, gentlemen.
Okay, the next is BZA 2018-05. It's a request for an accessory structure height variance from section 10.2.3 bracket B and section 12.2.1 bracket B bracket C. The location is 6114 Blue Rock Road. Applicant owner is Ralph Meyerjohn. Staff
Close
present.
that inner door when you go out, sir? Can you close that inner door?
Staff presentation, please.
Sorry.
Yes, this is a proposal for an accessory structure which would exceed the maximum height that's allowed by our zoning code. This is for a new house which is currently under construction on a property on Blue Rock Road. There was a former campground. The proposal is that this property has been subdivided into large 5-acre plus lots that are all served by a private driveway, somewhat utilizing the old campground driveway that served this property. This particular lot is one of the ones that's furthest back from Blue Rock Road. It borders the sort of back of the original campground property. This is a very similar case to one that you saw a couple months ago and actually denied. The proposal previously was for a 6.5-foot variance to the additional height. The applicant, after that denial, went back and reviewed the plans and was able to reduce the sidewall height by 2 feet and still accommodate his need to store recreational vehicles. So it's basically exactly the same except for that 2-foot reduction. Same subject property, same layout. This particular building meets the area size requirement in that it doesn't exceed the size of the house. There is a requirement that it have a 5-foot minimum side yard setback. This actually has an 85-foot setback, so it's substantially off the property boundary. It's located behind the house. Everything is basically right about it except for its height. Height we actually measure in 2 ways. Oh, by the way, this is the previous approval, or the previous proposal that was not approved. This is a rough approximation of where the maximum height would be versus what the average roof height is. And that's basically that 6.5-foot gap on that proposal. This is the new proposal. As you can see, there's not as much space over the garage doors as the last due to the shorter walls, but it's still about a 4.5-foot variance. There, and this is the floor plan for the garage. I didn't include this in your last PowerPoint presentation, but this is the house that's currently under construction. You can kind of see some similarities between the design of the garage versus the house. We do have 2 constraints on overall height, and it's the lesser of 2. It cannot exceed that 15-foot average height, and it cannot exceed the height of the principal structure, which is this house. The garage is shorter by quite a bit, even at the 6.5-foot variance. It was never an issue that would not be shorter than the house. We looked, this is also a new slide since last time, some of the history of variance requests. And by and large, the board has been adhering to the height restrictions. Almost all of these requests were on properties that have some lot size and are somewhat rural in that, you know, we're not looking at a dense Northbrook, Groesbeck kind of situation. Most of these were out in the country. However, some of them were more visible than others. The one that probably more notable, you approved a variance on Hanley Road for a 23.5-foot structure that was out to the side of the house. They had some extreme topography issues, and we measured the building from the lowest point of the ground to the average point of the roof. And because that particular one was built into a hillside, was like 1 floor on one side, 2 floors on the other, it ended up that it was exceeding the height. But because of the topography, that one was approved. Other one that was approved was on Kemper, and that was only 1 3/4 foot additional was approved for that one. Going back a ways, there was one on Colerain Road that was approved. That particular one was well out of sight of the road and neighboring properties. In this particular case, this building is in a very secluded location. The intent of setting these restrictions on accessory structures are that accessory be actually accessory, that it does not become the domineering factor on a site, both in terms of size, height, bulk. And there's also a concern that large accessory structures sometimes lead towards uses which are not permitted by code. They become sometimes auto repair shops, storage, things that are more commercial in nature. Not that that's at all what's being proposed here, but it is somewhat a concern that the dominant factor become the accessory building versus the house, and it is a residential zone. So staff findings are that the height variance requested is substantial since the proposed building exceeds the maximum height by 43%. The granting of the variance would grant a consideration not available to other property owners in the neighborhood. The property in question would likely yield a reasonable return without the variance. The proposal the property can reasonably be used as a single-family dwelling within the limits of the zoning regulations. Granting of the variance would probably not have a negative impact on the neighboring property, but would create a precedent to allow for tall accessory buildings if requested by neighboring properties. Approval of the height variance would not affect the delivery of governmental services. There are no unusual topographic or site configuration issues related to this property which would prevent the reasonable application of the height regulation. And by taking into consideration the benefit to the applicant if the variance is granted as weighed against the potential detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood and broader community, staff finds that substantial justice would be done by not granting the variance for additional height of the accessory building. And staff's recommendation is for denial of this request. We do appreciate the consideration for bringing this down 2 feet, but I think this board's job is to really look at what would be the impacts. Staff does concede that this is visually not going to be obtrusive in the neighborhood. It will be well hidden. It is not a domineering factor on the site given the size and the configuration of the house. So while we like to see adherence to the code, you may consider special consideration for some of the site conditions. Any questions?
Thank you. Questions for staff? Okay, is there anyone here to speak in favor of this request? Name, sir?
Yes, my name is Ralph Meyerjohn. I live at 7750 Denler Lane, Colerain Township. Marty, can you pull up the one Google drawing that I sent you that showed the barn location? It was a colored drawing from Google. That's it. You have, yes.
Yeah, I did not
so
put
guys,
that in the PowerPoint,
okay.
but they have copies of it.
So again, as you guys know, I was here a couple months ago. You told me to go back to the drawing board to see if there's something I could do. And basically what I did is I lowered the wall height. I put some high track doors on so I could still put my RV inside of the barn. But I did not alter the roof pitch of the barn because again, like Marty showed earlier, I'm trying to tie this in that it's not an out structure. It's part of my house. It looks like my house. It has the same details on the gable. It has the same shake siding. It has the same stone, the same colors, the same garage doors as my house. So again, I'm trying to create a look up there. This is what I do for a living. I built 1,400 homes. I know what's architecturally correct and what's not architecturally correct. And I'm trying to build my home in Colerain Township. I could have went anywhere else. I'm staying in Colerain Township. I've been here my whole life. And I'm trying to build something nice for myself. As you can see, I also have letters from all of the surrounding neighbors that have no objection to this. And if you do see that drawing, the Google shot, you can see this is in the middle of nowhere. Nobody can see it. None of my neighbors can see it. Nobody will ever be able to see it. The only person that's going to see it is myself. So I'm just asking for a variance. I understand that you don't want to set precedents, but when you look at it doesn't affect, I think you're up here to do the job of protecting Colerain Township and the people in Colerain Township. I just don't see how this would negatively affect the residents of Colerain Township.
Okay.
Is there any questions?
There may be.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else speak in favor? Anyone to speak in opposition? I'll ask that the public portion of this hearing be closed.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion, none. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Bartold.
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes.
Mr. Roberto.
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger.
Aye. Very good. Questions from staff? I mean, from board members. Mr. Roberto, we'll start with you.
I am trying to work every angle on this, just to try to see, I mean, I appreciate what you've done. And I'm trying to look at the topography, I'm looking at the elevation changes. And unfortunately, I don't see a hardship that's not being created but by yourself. And so, I mean,
All right, you want me to come back to you?
yeah.
Okay. Mr. Bartolt?
Did you look at a breezeway option?
I did, but it was, in my mind, it was going to really just close off the entire backyard area. Making connectivity, again, I understand what the rules are.
Yeah.
But how does that benefit the neighbors or anybody but myself? And I guess that's really,
Well,
the breezeway would really close off the entrance to my backyard. I mean, the entrance to my backyard is between the building
Well, right.
and my house.
So what's the distance between the two?
15 feet.
I mean, you could have a breezeway with sliding glass doors or some of those folding glass doors that you see now at restaurants where they open up the whole
I've seen
outside.
them. They're $12,000 a piece.
Well,
I
no,
know what they cost. I
I
built.
priced some too for a school. Yeah,
Well,
they're not cheap, but
No, I mean, it just, again, is that really a look? People come over to your home and now it's starting to look like a commercial building because you have to have glass doors that they have to walk through in order
well,
to
no,
get
you can
to
have
the
fake mullions in them to make it look gingerbreadish, But
I know, it just,
but
I don't
anyway,
think that's a nice look.
yeah, I was just
And it's, again, you can see what I'm trying to build here in Colerain Township. It's not like I'm building,
right.
some lean-to or something like that I could build
No.
up there.
Well, I agree.
And I guess we do need to take in consideration, I brought up last time, I mean, I took buildings that were up there that were 30, 40 foot tall. They're gone. I tore those all down. There's still a barn. There's another barn that's still up there that doesn't meet zoning. Nobody's saying anything about that. It's still sitting up there.
Yep. No, I mean, I agree. Certain.
And I think I took
rural-
a problem away from this township as well.
Certain-
We know that that was a problem. Meth labs, family nudist camp,
Right.
grow areas. I think some of that needs to be taken into consideration too. I turned a major problem into a paradise that's up there right now.
Okay, that's, again, I think the board knows I feel like when it's rural, there's a better
Right.
chance of
I
it
appreciate
happening.
Sure, I appreciate
And this is
that.
definitely one of those situations, so.
Right,
Okay.
I
Mr.
appreciate
Price?
that.
I guess my biggest concern is that a variance doesn't go with you, sir, it goes with the land. So if you decide to sell the house and the next guy says, I don't like the trees, I'm gonna clear cut everything and sell it to a lumber company. But now your pole barn's still standing there and it's clearly visible to your neighbors.
And it's not actually. Do you mind if I approach up there and
Go
show
ahead.
you?
Which one are we looking at, Google or?
Yeah. So when you look at where my barn is here, there's my property line. So realistically, if somebody came in and wanted to clear all of that woods is right there. There's no way they would see it. Now these guys up here, this guy's building here, this guy's building here, and this guy's building back over here. All of these are sold. And those are the letters you have from the neighbors. I mean, if this got clear cut, maybe.
Right.
I can't see somebody going in there and clear cutting that lot, but it could happen. I'm not disagreeing with that. But I think the only one that would actually hinder would maybe be this guy, and it couldn't because of all the woods he has around his property as well.
So do you know if any of your current neighbors are proposing, you can go back.
Go ahead, back to the podium.
If they're proposing to build, accessory structure as well, or?
I'm not aware of any, no. They're all in the design stages of their home, but they haven't proposed any out,
Yeah,
other
because granting
outstructure.
yours would also probably allow theirs to come in.
Right. Yeah, most of them are actually, they're all, 2 of the 3 are empty nesters, and they're building a house and that's it.
That's all I have, sir.
All right. Just a couple comments from myself. There's an advantage that you're your home site has, in that it's rural and it's a rolling topography, so things get lost in that hillside. I think that's an advantage, and the footprint of the accessory structure is smaller than the footprint of the house.
Correct.
And the height of the accessory structure is less than the height of the house.
Correct.
All that being said, I think stands as a positive thing. The one point I always struggle with is when individuals create their own difficult situation.
Correct.
Because they have a large vehicle they want to store, then things get out of hand in terms of our regulations. But I think the fact it is rolling terrain, not visible and smaller than the house itself, I think is a positive thing. But I always struggle with when people create their own difficult situation.
Clearly understand, sir.
That's all I really wish to say. I don't have any questions about. I appreciate the reduction in height. That helps. But thank you. I don't have any other questions for you.
Okay. And I think the point that you did bring up, that it's smaller, it's shorter than the house. I mean, it's looking like a garage. It's not going to look like a barn. It's a garage. That's what I'm trying to make it look like. That's why I put 2 doors instead of 1 door, to make it look like more of a garage versus 1 large door, so it looks like a barn or an out structure, so to speak.
Okay.
And it looks designed, it's not just a metal pole barn.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from board? Okay. I'll ask for a motion to either approve or deny this request for a variance to the structure height.
I'll make the motion to approve the variance, as noted.
Okay, a motion's been made to approve the variance for the height. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded, and we will do discussion. Any other discussion before we vote? Roll call vote, and this is to approve the accessory building height at 19 feet. I believe it's an even 19 feet.
19 and a half.
19 and a half.
Okay.
Mr. Bar-
Roll call vote to approve the request.
Mr. Bartold?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mr. Roberto?
No.
Mr. Reiniger?
Aye. Motion carries. Okay. The next case before us is BZA 2018-06. It is a request for a sign variance from section 15.3, section 15.8.3, bracket C, section 15.8.3, bracket D, bracket 1, and section 15.12.2, bracket A. The location is 7150 Colerain Avenue. The applicant owner is, and I'm going to butcher this, Shikanska Megan / Judy Ann Company Properties LLC. And a staff presentation, please.
Yes, this property is located on the northeast corner of Colerain Avenue and Banning Road. It contains a Shell station, which has been there for quite a long time. This particular proposal is related to a project, actually a couple neighborhood projects. Number one, you can see in the background of this that there used to be some old apartment complexes on John Rose Avenue. The township worked to get those demolished through grants, and that property has been turned over to a developer who's building elderly housing on that particular site. It'll have a new driveway coming out to Banning Road. And then also further to the east, the Struble Elementary School. The old school's being demolished and being replaced with a school almost twice the size of the previous school and increased capacity. Given those two projects, it's been the recommendation of the county engineer that Banning Road be widened to accommodate an additional right-hand turn lane onto Colerain Avenue going north. And in so much as this particular corner is already a bit crowded. You can see that within the confines of where this construction activity is going to take place, there's a large Duke Energy pole. There is a pole that supports the traffic lights in the intersection. There's a control box for the intersection, and I think there's some underground something in there that's being relocated. And lastly, the sign that you kind of see a little bit hidden behind those utility poles. The proposal is, well, you'll see in the application that there may be some inconsistencies, because what was initially proposed for the variance in kind of negotiation with the property owner and with the developer and so forth, we've changed that to take that sign and move it back about 13 feet from the back of the sidewalk. Given that the new configuration of right-of-way, and I'll show you some maps, just to hold the utility pole, the traffic signal, the signal box, and so forth, they ended up taking additional right-of-way into what's now the parking lot of that Shell station. And so there's going to be extra wide right-of-way behind the sidewalk to accommodate the public utilities. The question was, though, that the preference from the township standpoint is to try to get signs back from the sidewalk. And visually, when you're looking at signs going down the street, you're thinking in terms of distance back from the sidewalk, not that you really even know where the right-of-way line is at any given location on Colerain. Most of the time, the right-of-way is the back of the sidewalk. Sometimes it's further back. But visually, you don't particularly know that. This is a view of the sign. You can see that it is almost right on the back of the sidewalk in its current location. The current sign is about 19 feet high, so it is non-conforming on height. The current sign is also non-conforming on its setback. It's supposed to be at least 10 feet back. The good thing is the current sign is well under its maximum allowed sign area, which is 150 square feet. This particular illustration, I've sort of highlighted what was in your packet. The yellow line is the existing right-of-way. The red line is the proposed right-of-way. Really don't have my pointer. But you can see in this particular one that there's an indication, like right above the first bump in that red line, of where the sign was originally proposed to be relocated to get it out of the right-of-way. And that still would have been about 8 inches behind the curb. What we have talked about with staff is to actually move it to this particular location, which is still just outside the right-of-way, but that's about 13 feet in back of the sidewalk. And the proposal is to try to retain the current sign, even though it is 4 feet in excess of the height allowance. Generally, we do like to do away with non-conforming signs. In this particular case, this is an involuntary taking of right-of-way for this property owner. We've seen this, I'm sure you remember, in similar cases on Pippin Road. And staff has been back and forth on where we would like to recommend this particular one. This is a pretty critical project. The fact that if we do not approve this is irrelevant really from your standpoint, though. There are some financial implications to that for the township if this is not approved. But I think the mitigating circumstance in this particular case, this is an extremely tight site compared to some of the other ones, particularly for traffic circulation. To put it 10 feet inside the right-of-way as opposed to some of the previous ones you've looked at, this would get into the line of traffic in this. In the other two cases, it was sort of a corner of a parking lot that wasn't heavily trafficked or heavily used. This particular case, it is a very tight site, somewhat by the nature of the business. In gas stations, you have a lot more vehicle moving on a continuous basis versus retail, where somebody just goes, parks in a designated parking spot, and then conducts their business. This is an aerial photograph showing that project. This is the right-of-way drawing. I know these are in your packets and probably easier to read in your packets than it is on the screen, but you can see the amount of additional right-of-way, the amount of additional pavement that's needed to accommodate this lane of traffic here at the intersection. This is another drawing that was in your packet. That driveway that you see and dashes going towards the north, that's the new entry drive for the elderly apartments. And this is the illustration, and this labels basically all that stuff that gets kind of packed into that little area of right-of-way at the corner in terms of the utility poles and the traffic signal control box. The traffic signal control box is about 6.5 feet tall, about 3 feet wide. The concern on the height was if we bring it down to basically, if they were to cut that existing sign, for one thing, there's only 3 feet under the current sign to bring it down, and they would need to bring it down 4 feet. With the landscaping that would be required, plus the traffic control box, it would basically cover the illuminated sign, which has the gas prices, if they were to do that. And I can probably get back to this. As you can see, well, maybe you can see, there's about 3 feet under that sign. So the proposal is to keep the existing sign at 19 feet, keep it only less than a foot off the right-of-way, but at an alternate location from the original that would put it 13 feet behind the curb. And you can also see that if they move it back 13 feet, it puts it out of the line of sight of those utility poles as well. So that's their advantage. Staff findings are that the sign variance requested is substantial, since the zoning resolution encourages the elimination of non-conforming signs and encourages restrictions on the height and setback of signs. The granting of the variance would result in an increase in the overall sign, I should say sign height, not sign area, because this is actually smaller than what's allowed. It would be sign height allowed for the property. The property in question would likely yield a reasonable return without the variance. Granting of the variance would probably not have a negative impact on neighboring property, but could create a precedent to allow the replacement of other non-conforming signs if requested by similar properties. The granting of the sign request would not result in a larger amount of signage for the subject property other than surrounding properties, but would allow for additional height. Approval of the sign variance would not affect the delivery of governmental services. There are no unusual topographic or site configuration issues related to the property that would prevent the reasonable application of the sign regulations. However, the enforcement of the 10-foot setback would place the sign within key vehicle maneuvering lanes, which could affect the safe maneuvering of or movement of traffic on the property. By taking into consideration the benefit to the applicant if the variance is granted as weighed against the potential detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighboring neighborhood and broader community, staff finds that substantial justice would be done by granting the variance for relocation of the non-conforming signs. The approval is subject to the following conditions or recommended. That the location of the sign be at least 13 feet behind the existing sidewalk on Colerain Avenue. That's as depicted on the revised plan in your packet. The sign cannot be enlarged to more than the current size of 129 square feet, and that the curbing for the proposed sign be widened to accommodate 129 square feet of landscaping. This particular case, we've weighed back and forth on staff. Generally, we do like to see non-conforming signs go away, but the consideration on this site was really safety of traffic maneuvering if that sign is brought in. As you could see by the plan, there's not a lot of space between the current pavement on the site and the sidewalk. Generally, if they were building a new gas station, for one thing, we would require an acre minimum site. This is only 0.6 acres. We would also require that the pavement have a 15-foot buffer strip between the back of the sidewalk and the pavement. If we were to require that in this case, it would basically break down the whole maneuvering on the site. There just is not that much space on this site. So we believe that there is a hardship and a justification in the literal enforcement, particularly of that setback requirement, is a problem. The literal setback or the height limitation, if they were to use that existing structure, would create a site impediment with the traffic control box and the landscaping and so forth on that property. So that's our rationale behind this. Are there any questions?
Questions from the board to the staff?
I have one. Has anybody thought of putting the utilities underground?
We went that route at Colerain and Springdale.
Right.
It takes years to plan that, and that was extremely expensive. We would love to see utilities go underground on Colerain. The amount of visual clutter would be eliminated greatly, but I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Okay, that was my question.
And what I saw in the presentation, what we have in our packet is most current.
Yes.
It seemed like when the one you had in the presentation, you had the sign was going further north on Colerain Avenue versus going.
Yeah, but the one in your packet, that's the current.
You're saying this is correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Because didn't I see in your presentation one where it was actually one behind the other?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure I want to make sure I got the right idea of what you want to accomplish.
Yeah.
Well, and to further that, so you're saying the sign in your conditions, the beginning of the sign would be 13 feet from the sidewalk. And then how far away is it from the right-of-way?
It's only a foot from the right-of-way.
Okay. I was just looking at, again, this X103 sheet, and I see a 10-foot on there from a line to the beginning of the sign, and I wasn't sure if that jived with.
What they were trying to represent is that if you were to require the full 10 feet, that is what the resulting location would be. There's
You mean 10 feet from the right-of-way?
Correct, from the right-of-way.
So this is showing what could happen.
Yeah, is that the one that has the arrow saying line of traffic or something to that effect on it?
No.
Traffic flow, impact to property owner,
Yeah.
the title.
Well, that, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's the one showing that if they were required to do the full 10 feet in from the new right-of-way, how far into the pavement that would be.
So, okay. All right.
Any other questions for staff? Is the applicant here or someone representing the applicant? And state your name and address, please.
Pete Becker, Skanska Megan Construction, 201 East 5th Street, Cincinnati, Ohio.
Thank you.
What I wanted to do is just do a real brief explanation of my involvement with the project. and as well as the co-applicant Judy Ann Properties. You know, the Banning Road turn lane project is really a joint partnership between Colerain Township, Hamilton County, and Northwest Local Schools. As Mr. Kohler discussed before, the vacation of the John Rose vacancy with the joint partnership between the township and Cincinnati Metropolitan Housing Authority, as well as the district rebuilding the elementary school. So we're really trafficked. We did a lot of traffic studies early on, and between all the projects and then the existing conditions on Banning Road, it was a high recommendation that I guess there's a lot of stacking of traffic, and then when you close John Rose and add a school project, you know, really the concern is that the stacking during not only AM business hours, PM business hours, as well as school dismissals would create a bigger hardship on that community. We are simply the construction manager managing the traffic project through the partnership as a way to help move this thing along. I came on board back in early 2017 and started attending meetings, and really the project wasn't going far. We were talking a lot of who's doing what, which way we're going to procure it. Is it going to be a Colerain Township bid project, a Hamilton County bid project? And we all got in a meeting and had an idea that let's just stick it under our current agreement with the school district through the partnership and get this thing moving. Went to a meeting, and in that meeting, I was participants in that meeting was Colerain Township, Kevin Schwarzkopf with the maintenance, Jeff Mills as his interim role, Chris McKee with the Northwest School District, Ted Hubbard with Hamilton County, Jerry Chessie with Hamilton County, who handles a lot of these projects. And I think everybody's biggest concern was the right-of-way acquisition for the 4 parcels along Banning Road. At that time, we were talking about what it takes to obtain parcels and right-of-way. I'm not an expert. I just know sometimes that process can really drag a project out a long time. We started talking, and it was made a recommendation that the firm I represent hired Dennis Accardi Associates, who's an ODOT specialist for right-of-way acquisition. They actually do a lot of the Hamilton County work. So we signed them up, recommended them to be issued a purchase order by Colerain Township, and that's what started this whole process. So all we're trying to do is Judy Ann Properties is really is not the entity requesting the sign to be relocated. We're just trying to spearhead the project along. To answer your concerns, I'd love to see the utilities go underground. But there's a big Duke substation right across the street on Banning Road that probably is going to make that a even bigger project. We're just trying to process the request along. That's why it's in our name. You know, we've had many meetings on site to try to work with the property owner. Dennis Accardi here has had you know, normally we wouldn't even go ask a property owner to sign off on a permit application or a zoning kind of application variance. And Dennis Accardi here has been able to go and contact that property owner. And you know, all the biggest concerns we had to get this project moving was the gas station property. And they've been the most cooperative. And I think I was in there one day when they were delivering a tanker, and you know, it was pretty busy in the corner. And I'm not an expert. I really don't have any skin in the game. I do know that if that sign moved out in the middle of her parking lot, you know, it could impact the traffic flow. On another note, this is just one of the 4 parcels. Mr. Accardi had advised you don't typically like to start a right-of-way acquisition until you have all the ducks in a row for all 4 parcels. It just gives people time to sit and think about a little 3-foot strip of land as opposed to going the eminent domain route. So anyway, that's my story. The ODOT has approved this project. We have permits by Hamilton County secured. ODOT has approved the process with the current drawing showing that sign location. And that's my story. I don't know if Mr. McKee with the Northwest Schools would like to say anything, or Dennis Accardi, but I think Marty and Martin, Mr. Kohler has done a great job. We're trying to present options and solutions. At the same time, make a right-of-way acquisition a smooth transition as opposed to the public process.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak in favor of this request? Your name,
Yes,
sir?
My name's Chris McKee, and I'm the business manager for the Northwest Local School District at 3240 Banning Road. I just wanted to stress the importance of this project or this variance to the school district. Without this variance and cooperation from this landowner and being able to get this done, I don't think we'll have a turning lane. If we don't have a turning lane, we open school on August 21st. And I can't imagine what it's going to look like with traffic, with 900 students being delivered every day to that building and having to get those buses stacking up out on Banning Road, trying to get out on the Colerain Avenue. So any consideration would be greatly appreciated.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else speak? Sir.
I'm a right-of-way acquisition agent, and I'm also an ODOT project manager. And I was retained to help them with this project. And the initial problem that we found, it's not inconsistent with other projects that we worked on, is signage. Okay, so the very first thing that we wanted to get resolved was where the sign was going to go, because this is a voluntary project. This does not have eminent domain with it. So the cooperation of all the property owners, especially the business on the corner, the Shell station, with Paramount, and getting any issue up there resolved. Initially, we came up with an idea of moving the existing sign laterally down Colerain, okay, in a northerly direction, simply to maintain where it was. In talking with people from Colerain Avenue, they indicated that they weren't in favor of that. They didn't want it that close to the sidewalk. So the alternative proposal was to move the sign straight back at its existing location, but just out of the right-of-way, okay? That does put us at the 13 feet behind the existing sidewalk, which is the desired location or distance that's been explained to me from Colerain Township. I went out several times, met with the property owner. She's a smart business lady, but she has lived in the township, she's worked in the townships, and she wants to be cooperative and a good business partner in the township. So when I presented the alternative location for the sign and also showed her that the driveway on Banning Road is actually being moved 24 feet farther away from the intersection. That is a huge safety consideration. It's been involved in many other projects that I've dealt with that deal with access problems, okay? So what it's gonna do is, instead of leaving the sign where a number of large telephone poles and signalization poles, which essentially are gonna block the sign even more, by moving it back, okay, and moving the access point on Banning Road, the driveway, it does not interfere with access to the front pumps from the Banning Road side, and it doesn't interfere with access to Banning Road exit from those pumps. Because in this situation, the only way you gain access into that station on the Banning Road side is you have to go through the intersection and turn left down Banning Road from Colerain. Where it's at right now, you've got about a car or a car and a half tops. So if there's any traffic that's stopped at that location, you literally have a situation where people turning left from Colerain Township can be caught in the intersection. Moving it farther down Banning Road gives you additional staging capacity and reaction time for people turning out of that intersection to see that a car is going to stop to try and turn into the station. The only thing that I can tell you from my experience, okay, the moving of the sign back is the least intrusive. It's basically the owner has already approved and has agreed that the access, ingress and egress to the front pumps from both the Colerain side driveways and the Banning side driveways, in her opinion at least, is not going to adversely affect her business, which is huge. Absolutely huge in this circumstance. I normally don't get this type of cooperation from a business owner. The very first thing they do is lawyer up, and it goes downhill from there, okay? So I hope the board takes this opportunity to realize what an opportunity it is from a person who values their business in this township, and the benefit of moving traffic out of that general area in a much faster manner, because this has already been reviewed, as previously stated by Hamilton County. It's already been reviewed, and they've made the determination that a right-hand turn lane is very much needed in this location to move traffic through the area. Any questions?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone to speak in opposition? I'll ask for a motion to close the public portion of this request.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Discussion? Hearing none. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Bartolt?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mr. Roberto?
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger?
Aye. Now, questions from the board to the applicant. Mr. Price, we'll start with you today.
I have no questions.
Mr. Bartolt?
No questions.
Mr. Roberto?
I mean, I guess, who's the applicant? I mean, the property owner really isn't represented here today, are they? So are you representing the property owner?
The property owner signed it.
Okay, so you're representing, okay. That's fine. I just want to make sure they were represented. Okay, I have no questions then.
I have no issue at all with the setback adjustment. I do have a request on the, there's another Shell station probably a mile up the street at the corner of Springdale Road and Colerain Avenue. It has a similar sign. I would like the signs to be the same height, and I don't know, certainly 15 feet is the top end, but I'm trying to get at least consistency between two Shell stations. Is it possible to request, I certainly don't need it to be any shorter than 15 feet. If the other Shell station sign is at 13 and a half feet, so be it. But can we get this thing lower?
Creating a hardship by doing that. Because they're having to make a sign now that they wouldn't have moved otherwise.
Well, they're going to move the sign. Can they cut the legs off?
Not without losing the lower panel,
Right,
and
losing
it's
the visibility.
already smaller than the eligible size, so that would decrease sign area. It would also create more of a impact. I didn't get the angle, but that traffic control box would start blocking the actual numbers on the sign.
Okay. All right, thank you. Then at this point, if there are no other questions from the board, I'll ask for a motion to approve the sign variances request and subject to the conditions 1, 2, and 3, which is 13 feet, current signage size of 129, and that they be landscaped to match that sign size.
I would make a proposal to accept the application as it has been recommended by staff.
Okay.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Bartolt?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mr. Roberto?
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger?
Aye. All right, thank you. The motion passes and variance is approved. On next order of business, which is unfinished business. I have none. We have approval of March 28th minutes.
I can motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded to approve March 28th. Any discussion or modifications? Roll call vote to approve, please.
Mr. Bartolt.
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes.
Mr. Roberto.
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger.
Aye. Next meeting is June 27th, 2018. Administrative matters, none. Anything? Okay. We stand adjourned.
How many cases that, Larry?
Got a question, sir?